think in both my career choice and job choices and spouse choices, you have to listen to your gut or your heart. I think that that's critically important, and not to ignore those gnawing feelings. Like in college, I knew I didn't want to be alone. I needed people. So I chose a different career path. I love to teach. I love, so I mean, my whole career, it's been about that. And so I think, but listening, not staying in a full-time job because there was something gnawing at me that wasn't happy. So that, for me, that's my golden nugget.
Here on the Blank Pages podcast, you've heard us talk about various topics: change, success, what it means to live and work in our career, and other topics exploring other aspects as they've related to my father and myself. Well, for today's episode, we're bringing on a guest to talk about their life, their experiences, and their story. In today's episode, we're talking with Kim Monroe, my mother, and my dad's wife. And she's going to be sharing with all of us her story, how it shaped her, the choices that she had to live with, and the ones that she got to choose that shaped not only who she was, but how she feels about her life today. And she reflects and shares that knowledge with all of us. So join us for another episode of the Blank Pages podcast. You've heard my story, you've heard my dad's story, but now we think it's time to bring in some new stories. So today we have a very special guest, at least very near and dear to my dad and I. But Mom, or Kim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Mom. I'm also Kim, and I'm also Grandma or Nana.
Why did we decide to bring in a guest? Maybe we can share that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, we've been doing all the talking, so it'd be nice to get somebody else's perspective besides our own. But I think, too, in this case, we've talked a lot about change. We've talked about identity. We've talked about a lot of various things. And it would really be good to get others' perspectives on it. So we've heard from some people in the feedback, some of their perspectives, and we thought this would really be fun to get some other perspectives besides just our own.
And I think the only thing else to add to that is you've heard our stories about change, childhood, and everything in between, all the way up to the modern day. But we'd love to hear some other stories from some other perspectives to see how we can continue learning and evolving these stories and each other.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, I guess why don't we go back to the beginning, before BE, before Evan? And why don't we talk a little bit about, Mom, your earlier years? And I know, to dive right into the meat, when you were growing up, you had, I think, a pretty monumental event happen in your life pretty early on, especially at the age of 11 with your diagnosis. So if you're all right, if you don't mind us jumping right in there, can you share a little bit about that? Maybe share with the listeners kind of what that looked like for you, what that change was, and how it impacted, you as a kid.
Right. Well, as you and your dad know, I grew up in a small town in Ohio, Worcester, Ohio, and everybody knew everybody. And it was sort of an idyllic childhood, or I thought so. Although at that time frame in history, back in the 60s, there was a very famous model by the name of Twiggy. And a lot of young girls my age, I was around 11 at the time, everybody wanted to look like Twiggy. She was skinny, she had long straight hair, and I was looking like her, and I was really excited, although it wasn't a good thing because I'd lost over 35 pounds in a very short period of time. And when my mom took me to the doctor, upon the urging of my oldest sister, who lived on her own now, your Aunt Sharon, and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which, weight loss, inability to sleep, very moody. While those are common with puberty, it wasn't normal. So I was lucky in that I didn't go into a coma, or I was alive and kicking up to that point. But what happened during that is you're hospitalized for a week so that they can really, monitor you in a hospital with blood tests, et cetera, because this is, again, in the 1960s. And, you didn't have all the technology you do now. And so, and at the time, I just thought this was a normal way to grow up. And it wasn't until I reflected afterwards back at what a monumental change that was. It didn't really, I remember my parents, especially my mom, had a lot of work to do. She changed, was very careful. She bought a scale, was weighing out things, measuring things very carefully, and just to help me a lot. But I think it didn't, it didn't really hit me, I think, until I went to college, in terms of, wow, now I got to do all this on my own.
And you kind of answered my question, at least initially, because, I think growing up as kids, we kind of just look at our peers of our age to look at like what's normal, right? I'm using quotation marks for those listening. And being diagnosed with something where you kind of have to fundamentally change your everyday fairly substantially just so you can be borderline healthy. Um, you know, how was that growing up with other children? Like, was that something you had to explain? Was it something that was hard to adjust to? Was it something you were embarrassed by that you didn't mind all that
No.
much? Or I know these are
Yeah.
challenging
Yeah.
questions, but I'm curious.
No, they're great questions. And I think at that time, you weren't supposed to ask questions. So my peers, my teachers knew, people in authority knew about my diabetes, but my friends didn't really, ask any questions. And I was the only child. There wasn't any other child that I knew with diabetes. And when I was in the hospital, when afterwards, I was it. And it wasn't until high school that I attended a class for diabetes, my first diabetes education course, if you will, at Worcester Community Hospital. And I remember I was the only one in the room under the age of 50. And, it was different because none of those people that I was sitting in that room with had to take insulin injections, or very few. So I think, and I remember at school, my teacher would say, Kim, we're celebrating a birthday today. So if you want to go to the gym and run some laps, so I could have part of a cookie or a cupcake or whatever. And I would go and run laps in the gymnasium. And lucky for me, I was a really active kid. I was always outside running, playing, doing stuff. And we ate a really healthy diet anyway. We never had sodas in the house, right? It was always just water or milk. So I don't think my day-to-day life seemed so different.
So did you try to keep it from the other kids? Like, I mean, because you had to take shots then, which is different than what you do now.
Right. Well, I only took, again, everything was different. I started out on pig and beef insulin, and it was only U40 strength. So now they only make U100 strength, or U200 or U300 strength. So it's a whole different ball game than it was then. And I only took 1 or 2 injections a day. That's all we knew at the time to do.
So you mentioned the story about the class you went to, and you were the only one under 50. You also had mentioned prior to us recording this, you had said it had another impact on you as well.
I remember in that class, there was this really sweet gentleman who looked to be like 80 something. I'm sure he wasn't, but from a 16-year-old's point of view, he looked very old. And he was a double amputee, and he'd lost both of his legs because of his diabetes. And I remember thinking, or being distracted by the thought that, that could have been avoided. Diabetes doesn't have to take your legs. Now, again, this coming again from a girl who didn't know a lot, but this class, even I'm listening, one of the messages that both the nurse and the dietitian who taught that class, who inspired me later in life, to pursue a career in diabetes. But I remember they kept saying, if you eat a healthy diet, if you live an active life, if you take all your medication, and you can stay pretty healthy. And, here I am in my upper 60s, and thank you, God, I'm doing pretty well.
So this actually, this is a good segue, and also something that Dad and I have talked about on a previous episode about change and how there's a lot of change that can be forced. There's change that is forced on us. We have no choice in, right? And I think being diagnosed with, you didn't choose to have type 1 diabetes. You didn't get type 1 diabetes from someone else. There were various factors, and that's where you found your life. However, or I should say, and that then went on to later influence what you chose to do with your life to some extent. Do you want to talk a little bit about how maybe that this part of your life, or this area which you did not choose for yourself, went on to later influence you and to make choices that you did have more control over?
Sure. Yeah. You're right in that when I got diabetes, I didn't feel anger or upset. And I didn't even realize how many people, when they're diagnosed with diabetes, no matter where they are in their life, there is a lot of resentment, anger about what they can't do or can't have, especially as it relates to food. And I never had that. And I always, so I think attitudinally, if that's a word, but in my attitude about it was just different. That sort of helped me stay on a more positive side. And I'm overall a positive person anyway, but I was always sort of a geeky kid. I mean, I loved outside. I loved doing, experimenting with things, and science was always a big thing. And this is I'm going to take a sidestep because I think it's, again, telling of the times. And this was now in the early 70s. I was really loving science. In my biology class, they offered a summer camp for kids. And I really wanted to go. And I remember the teacher at the time, who everybody loved him, Mr. Bird, loved Mr. Bird. I did not like Mr. Bird because he told me to my face he would not recommend me for class, not because of my diabetes, but because I dressed too nice, and that I would never be able to go to a sleepaway camp because I dressed too nice. Well, he didn't know I went to a Catholic school and wore uniforms for 8 years. And so when I got to high school, I wanted to wear nice clothes. I didn't want to, just wear routine stuff. And it was such a slam. I thought I missed an opportunity because of him. I was really upset, but that didn't stop me. My chemistry teacher took a liking to me, and I pursued, I thought, geology, because I always love rocks, right? So I was collecting rocks for a long time. And so when I went off to college, that was going to be my career choice. But by my sophomore year, I realized if you're a geologist, you spend a lot of time alone. And if anybody knows me, I'm a people person. I like to talk. I like to be with people. And I realized that geology was not a good career choice for me. And I switched to nutrition to become a dietitian because I thought I could really help educate people with diabetes. So my diabetes was actually one of the silver linings of my life that I could do something with. I could help people. I could be relatable to them. And so it did help sort of spur me into that career.
So it's interesting you say that. We've also talked about things like identity, and that your diabetes was part of your identity, and you took that and then you turned that into using it to help other people and
right.
impacting your career choices.
Right. And education to me is always critical. And when I had the opportunity to work at both George Washington University Medical Center and then later at Albany Medical Center and even Albany Memorial Hospital, one of the key things that I always really enjoyed doing was working with medical students, residents, fellows, nursing students, any student, to really help them understand how important it is to listen to your patients because you don't know their story. And also, don't make assumptions about people. And to really just giving a prescription. I remember talking to a group of residents, and part of what I needed to do was say, okay, you guys all are going to have diabetes for a week. You're going to wear this insulin pump. You're going to follow this meal plan. You're going to be testing your blood sugar. And they were like deer in headlights. And I said, just remember, when you're talking to clients and you are asking them to do these things, it is not easy. Hi, Tress. I see Tress.
Do you find at times having do you find at times having diabetes and then also working in it can be all consuming in terms of your own diabetes?
Well, it made me realize there were areas that were scary for me because we're not immortal, right? And one of the things that I learned early in my career is I really didn't want to work on a dialysis unit or with kidney failure clients. Part of it because it's like, I can't predict the future. And even though I've tried really hard to take good care of myself, that could be me. And so I'd work in a cardiac unit. I'd work in, lots of different areas, even neurology, but that part scared me. So to answer your question, I don't know, maybe I segmented it. This is my diabetes, and then this is my career. I loved it. And I always got really good feedback from patients or clients that said, and even other medical professionals, that I think it's great that you can relate to patients who have diabetes. And that was a gift that, yeah, you're right. I didn't ask for it or sign up for it, but it was helpful and helped me create a bond with a lot of people.
Well, and I know it sounds like to some extent, there was from this desire to help people and to serve people in some way, which geology, at least not directly, was going to do that. And going back to that story of you when you were 15 in that class of seeing that double amputee and thinking to yourself, I feel like this could have been prevented. I wonder how much of that played maybe had an impact on it.
Right.
Yeah. So, well, then I guess moving, so this was your early career and you were working in hospitals, you were serving people, and you were helping patients. Real people understand this, especially in the earlier days of diabetes care. And then comes another change in your life in the form of the man sitting next to you. How talk through that, and what did that look like for you at the time? You were starting your career, and then you meet this other individual. What did that look like? Because I think a lot of times people don't necessarily talk about how their lives change when they meet their significant other, and what that looks like. There's compromises, there's shared experiences, and other things like that.
Yeah. I think the one time, I think in all parts of my life, when I mentioned earlier, when I went off to college, the diabetes hit me that I got to do all this stuff. I have to have a refrigerator for my room because I have to store my medication. I have to have, and I was very open about my diabetes to everyone. And so when I met your dad, I remember our first date was Valentine's Day. And he gave me chocolate, a box of chocolates. And I didn't tell you then that I had diabetes, but I did share with him later. And then he felt horrible, but again, it wasn't horrible. I thought it was a very sweet gesture. And, but you do think about social interactions, in terms of an intimacy. I mean, it's like, ooh, what if I have a low blood sugar? How's that, all of that thing. So, I think, and I didn't want to scare anybody off, but I also thought I have to be totally brutally honest about this. And at the time I met your dad, I was in my first dream job. I worked in a diabetes center, an outpatient diabetes center at George Washington University. And I loved that job. I had wonderful people I worked with. We were doing research and we were teaching and it was a great job. I loved that job. Until I didn't, but
So I think the reason she didn't tell me on the first date was she wasn't sure if I'd make it to a second date. So she didn't want to tell him, right? It wasn't worth. But we talked at the very beginning about the ripple effect, and I remember when she did tell me she had diabetes. That was a game changer for me too, because I had never been around anybody with diabetes, and as our relationship built over time. And at that point, she was taking shots, and she it wasn't as smooth in terms of controlling her diabetes as it is now. So it was a big game changer for me too, because now we had to be sensitive to, like, when we got to a restaurant, make sure we got in when she took her insulin, worrying about low blood sugars. These were all new experiences for me too, and it was it was definitely different. You think about a relationship and what you're committing to. And as as your mom said, she was very honest about her diabetes and what it could mean long term. And so it was certainly something that impacted her, but now impacted us as a couple, which was certainly something I had not anticipated, but it was a learning experience for sure.
Yeah, it goes to show. I think communication in a relationship is so key. And being honest and communicative. So I think that's critical.
So I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, I wanted that.
So I wanted to ask you a question, because he started out with BE. So let's now go AE. You're now a mom.
Oh, AE.
I could start, I guess. BB for before Brian.
I see.
And
before Evan.
So Brian comes along, and then 3 years later, Evan comes along, and now you are a working professional, and now you've got 2 children. What was that like for you? How did you navigate that?
Yeah. Well, early in my career, as I said, I loved it. And my goal was to one time be a director of a diabetes center. And the silver lining to you getting offered your job in Albany, New York, is that I applied for a position as a director of a new diabetes program, and I got it. So even though Albany would not have been my first choice to go live, but it was very cold, long winters. But that's where both Brian and Evan were born. So that was pretty good. And again, reflecting back, and I've worked with thousands or hundreds of clients over the years, I had so many women tell me, oh, when I got diabetes, my doctor said I could never have children. Nobody ever said that to me. And so I was shocked when people said that. So I was a very, very, very lucky individual that I was able to have 2 healthy children. But the technology at the time, I was wearing an insulin pump, which you were part of the decision of that. I remember I started on my pump before we got married, and I asked you what you thought about it. And I remember your answer to this day: anything that will keep you healthy and around longer, I want you to have. That was very sweet.
So if I can jump in here. So beyond your diabetes, talk about, because this is an issue a lot of people continue. We have this conversation in our society about parenting, jobs, all those, trying to balance all those responsibilities. For you, we moved to Albany. Now all of a sudden, a few years later, we have a family. How did you manage? You said you had the job you wanted. You had 2 kids. How did you manage? Did you feel good about it or not good about it? Just talk a little bit about that.
I did initially. I thought my goal was to continue to work full time, but once Brian was in our life, and there was like this aching feeling that I didn't feel good about not being with him as much. And then when Evan came along, I couldn't do it. I could not be at work full time thinking somebody else is raising our kids. And I think it's a personal choice. Some women don't get to have that choice. Some women, or really have that emotional response. But I just felt, and I knew in my heart that I wanted to have a part-time role because I loved my career and what I did, but I didn't want to do it full time. And so I wrote a proposal to the director of nursing, who our program fell under at the time, to see if I could remain the director, but in a part-time role. And the answer was no, absolutely not. It was full-time, no negotiation. And so I stepped down from that position, and that was really hard. It was hard because it was my dream job, but I also knew I wasn't really happy as a person, as a mom and a professional. So, you and I made it work that I was able, and then I got an even better job. I did get to be a director of another program part-time. And that was really great. And we had really a wonderful caretaker, Betty, who loved our kids and made that happen and work. Coming back to the DC area, that was more of a challenge.
So I want to talk a little bit about that.
It was a challenge because it was a much more expensive area, and you and I weren't sure I could maintain a part-time role or even find a position. But we did. I mean, again.
But you didn't choose us to move to DC. We moved to DC because of my job.
Your job.
So you were uprooted because of me, which made you have to make a career choice. And you made the choice because of the kids to not work full time anymore. But then that impacted your professional path,
right,
which you've talked about many, many years later, whether you have some regrets about that. So just, again, how, as the years have gone on, now you kind of reflect back, how do you feel about that?
Yeah. I remember, I think, Evan, you might have been in later elementary years, and I was offered a full-time position as a director of another diabetes program, but it was only a full-time job, and it was minutes from our house. And so Evan, or, Brian was either in 8th grade or anyway, it doesn't matter. And I really thought long and hard about that. But then at that same time, and this is now the years to early 2000s, where my mom was diagnosed with dementia, and we moved my mom and dad to Virginia because they really couldn't live independently in Ohio anymore. And I remember thinking about that because I thought, my mom's going to need help. And it was one of those gut things. I didn't feel right about taking this full-time job. I really did want it, but I really was having a calling of still being there for you, Evan, and your brother, and also for my mom and dad. So I know it was the right choice to make.
I appreciate sharing that because, hindsight is 2020 about the past, whether, and you'll never know if a decision was the right one, the wrong one, or something in between because you didn't make that decision. I think looking back, is there anything that has surprised you from where you started, when we first started talking about this 11-year-old, Kim, walking on this path versus who you are today?
It's a really great question. I don't know that. I think the first thing that comes to my mind, and I know it's not unique to me, are relationships. And I remember my sister Renee. We're 5 years apart, but we've always been close. But as kids, up till the time of my diagnosis, we would have physical fights. We fought all the time. And my poor mother had to go talk to the priest about it because she couldn't get us to stop fighting. I mean, how bad are we? But the minute I got diagnosed with diabetes, that changed. And Renee did a 180 and is my best friend, has been for life. And so I think about the relationships I formed in, then, and then people in my career that I'm still very, very much in touch with, and clients over the years that to watch, their families grow or whatever. All of that has been very special. And I think that's true of any career, but I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out.
Well, I guess if there was one thing from all this experience that you've learned, and I know one is not a lot, but if there's one thing that you could share, some wisdom that's unique to you that you've learned through, the generations of your life, walking this unique path that's wholly your own, what does that look like, or what does that sound like?
I think in both my career choice and job choices and spouse choices, wife tipping. No. You have to listen to your gut or your heart. I think that's critically important, and not to ignore those gnawing feelings. Like in college, I knew I didn't want to be alone. I needed people. So I chose a different career path. I love to teach. I love, so I mean, my whole career, it's been about that. And so I think, but listening, not staying in a full-time job because there was something gnawing at me that wasn't happy. So that, for me, that's my golden nugget.
I like it. It's a simple yet tried and true adage to always follow your gut, right? Or a more romantic way might be to say to always follow your heart. And I'm sure Dad and I on various levels have had those feelings, and a lot of times people tend to ignore that feeling and do something anyways that doesn't quite align with them. And I think most people will tell you as they've grown up and look back that they're like, I really wish I listened to my gut and just really stuck with that. But that is this tale for another time. So yeah, anything else you want to share with us before we wrap up?
Well, a couple things, and I'll keep them short, is you listened to your gut, Evan, in moving to Spain, much to my chagrin, but happy for you that you followed your heart. You followed that gut instinct. Your dad, he always wanted to get his MBA, and he was in a job that was helping to pay for it, but he had the boss from another planet, and she was a very unsupportive boss for supporting a family. And he left that job and he pursued his MBA. So, I mean, I think you guys are both examples of really following your heart. So it felt true for you guys too.
That's what you get with the Monroe family. We follow our guts. So,
and what she doesn't say, because she doesn't give herself enough credit, this past year she became a master. I think her master gardener classes were way harder than my MBA program. What she had to go through during that, and she wasn't sure about it, but she stuck with it and she achieved it. So, let's give her a lot of credit that Mom is also looking to achieve and grow.
Yeah, bad name though. You're never a master at gardening. You're just always learning. So I don't really like the title, but yeah, it was hard. It was hard. Learned a lot.
Well, I feel like I have certainly learned a lot today. And yeah, just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for coming on and being our premier guest on the Blank Pages podcast. We're glad to have you.
It's
and
an honor.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll look forward. Maybe we'll have you back in the future again. But otherwise, thank you as always for listening.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening or watching another episode of the Blank Pages podcast. If you liked what you heard or saw, please leave us a like, subscribe, and let us know what you thought of this episode. If you're interested, go to our website, blankpagespod.com, where you can check out a little bit more about us, as well as sign up for our newsletter if you want to stay up to date on the most recent episode, as well as anything else that we might be working on. Get in touch with us at hello@blankpagespod.com, and we look forward to hearing you and seeing you in the next episode.